Thanks, Mark. Happy Tuesday, everyone. It is Tuesday, right? Do I have that right, Tara?
I do
Yes.
believe it's
Yes.
Tuesday.
Oh my goodness. I just completely lost what day of the week is, because I'm at this computer on these Zooms. So it happens. So, well, happy Tuesday, everyone. Happy 2022. It's April. Let's see what are the things that I can remember. And it's Hummingbird Hour Day. And I'm so excited to have another wonderful, wonderful episode of Hummingbird Hour with another fantastic guest, Tara J. Frank, which I'm looking forward to learning from and talking about her fantastic new book, The Waymakers. So welcome to Hummingbird Hour. I'm delighted that you're all here. What we'd like to do is kick off with sharing about a few of the heritage months that are in progress. So let's just walk through some of the months that we should be aware of. So the first is Autism Acceptance Month. This is previously we were calling this Autism Awareness Month, and so this is an evolution in that language. So I encourage you, if you're curious, to do that Google search and say, why we changed the language? Let's learn we can all learn to fish and learn a little bit more about our fellow humans along the way. So Autism Acceptance Month, and then we also have, I think it's Arab American Heritage Month. And for those of you who follow Rhodes Perry, you'll have seen Rhodes has done a phenomenal job of sharing great content about Arab American Heritage Month. If you don't follow Rhodes Perry, definitely follow Rhodes Perry, another phenomenal author and change maker. And we have Celebrate Diversity Month, which I think is probably why we're all here, is we really believe in celebrating diversity and celebrating the unique beauty that all of us are as humans. So I'm excited to be part of Celebrate Diversity Month as well. So next month for Hummingbird Hour on May 17th, be sure to register. Super excited for Vanessa and JR Ford to join us to talk about their children's book. Vanessa and JR have a transgender child, and they created a book to celebrate their story, and we're going to share with us about it, what it looks like to be and feels like to be parents of a trans child and support their journey. As part at Hummingbird, we believe that diversity conversations are for kids too, and we want to create opportunities and space that are age appropriate to engage children in those conversations so that they can see and respect and accept the other humans around them in beautiful ways. So we'll be exploring some of that conversation with Vanessa and JR next month. And without further ado, I have to now talk about Tara J. Frank. So let's do a bit of a bio on Tara, for those of you who may not be familiar with this wonderful human that has joined me today. So Tara J. Frank is an equity strategist who has advised and educated thousands of Fortune 500 executives across multiple industries on how to create an equitable workplace. Frank is the author of 2 books, including her newest book, The Waymakers, Clearing the Path to Workplace Equity with Competence and Confidence. Competence and confidence. That's a mouthful there, but I love it. I'm still working, by the way, on getting my subtitle on my book to roll off my tongue. So we'll talk about that later, which launches in May of 2022. And I know you can actually order it online today. So definitely get your copy of Waymakers if you don't have it. Before founding her culture and leadership consultancy, Frank spent 21 years at Hallmark Cards. For anyone who doesn't know, I love cards, so we might talk about that a little bit, where she served in multiple roles, including Vice President of Multicultural Strategy and Corporate Culture Advisor to the President. I hope I was clear enough. Mark was giving me tips on making sure that I was clear so we can get the closed captions to work, because we want to make sure everyone feels welcome. So Tara, it's so great to have you here. Thank you for saying yes and joining us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. And I'm excited to be here. And hi, everybody joining us.
Welcome. So I think if we can drop the slides and let's dive into a great conversation with Tara. So, Tara, before we went live today, one of the questions that, so first of all, I should make sure that people know you and I are both former corporate leaders who had in-house roles in spaces that were related to diversity. And we're both authors at Amplify. So we have books. My book comes out later this year. So I think we decided we're cousins at our publisher. So which I love. I'm curious. What was the catalyst? Let's start a little bit about your career. You had a great career at Hallmark, and you made the leap out into this brave world of consulting. What was the catalyst that led you to take this leap and write books and become a consultant?
Yeah, so $1 million question, honestly. I, as you mentioned, spent 21 years at Hallmark Cards. People ask me all the time, when did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? And my honest answer is, I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. That was not necessarily on my career trajectory. I planned to retire from Hallmark Cards, to be honest with you. It was a wonderful experience for me, a great company, fantastic people. And I had always been very planful about that. I started as a greeting card writer, interestingly, spent a lot of time kind of working my way up in the creative division. I became vice president of creative writing and editorial. I then led business innovation for a few years. I then designed and stood up a multicultural center of excellence, which was really an embedment arm, kind of meant to help all of our consumer-facing leaders better understand how America was changing and meet those emerging needs in meaningful and sustainable ways. And then I reconnected with someone I knew from college. I had gone through a divorce. We reconnected. We decided we wanted to merge our families. And that was going to require me to move from Kansas City, Missouri to Dallas, Texas. At which point I really had to rethink how I was going to continue to impact the world. And so that's what kind of led me to think, how am I going to create a value proposition, right, that feeds me as a person, that allows me to continue on my professional purpose, and also just gives me a chance to make a difference in people's lives. So that's kind of when I decided to start my own company, and I began with leadership development consulting, and it emerged into something that was a lot more culture focused, which kind of led me to this diversity, equity, and inclusion space. If you don't mind, I'd like to kind of pull a thread here. If you think about what I shared, I started working with consumers, focusing on consumers. So I was marketplace focused for much of my career. I was always passionate about talent, but I realized that in a consumer goods company, you can't really sustainably meet the needs of a changing America if you don't have those same people on the inside of the company, right? Who have an intuitive understanding of very lived experiences, so that you can stay ahead of the curve, so that you can meet people's needs genuinely. So I became passionate about talent and diversity from that angle, and ultimately realized that the individual, it's good to develop the individual, but we all exist within a culture, we exist within a climate, and that climate has to be healthy, that climate has to be nurturing, or those individual leaders just won't be able to win. So all that to say, here I am just trying to help leaders make a more healthy, more nurturing, more nourishing climate for their people.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And as you and I already know, there's so much of, while we may have different frameworks or language that we use, the core beliefs and what we want to bring to organizations is very much aligned. And as I was listening to you talk there, I added to the chat our Representation Matters paper from Hummingbird, which covers the 4 lenses of representation. And we talk about how humans need to be able to see themselves in the culture of the company, and the people that work at the company, and the products that are made for the customers, and how those companies give back to communities. And I hear so much of that in what you're sharing about your belief and what led you to this path. And I think similarly in the I loved my career in-house in so many ways, and am grateful for the companies that gave me the opportunity to learn and to grow and to spread my wings. And I was ready to also fly, I think, and just sort of try out this new landscape to see if I could help make workplaces where humans thrive. It's very exciting. So thank you for sharing your story. I also want to make sure I mention a couple items for everyone with us. If you haven't already, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat, where you're joining us from, who you are, what you do, share your LinkedIn link so you can connect with each other. And I also want to make sure I give credit to who I mentioned Mark earlier, Mark Travis Rivera and Lindsay Morton, who are the forces behind Hummingbird Hour, who make sure that Tara and I get to look beautiful on stage today, this virtual stage, and share this conversation. So thanks to Mark and Lindsay behind the scenes. Okay, so we're going to talk about the Waymakers because I have so many questions, but I want to start with a framing question around the concept of equity. And when I do work with our clients and have conversations, I find that it's pretty easy for people to come up with definitions for the words diversity and the words inclusion. They might use, again, different language and different ways to describe it, but generally those all make sense. The equity one is the one that both seems to be the hardest for people to define and also the most controversial. And your book is all about how to bring equity to life. So I'd love to hear how you define equity and how you describe that.
Yeah, I think about it as equal access to opportunity. And to me, opportunity has many different facets. That can certainly be the opportunity to live a healthy life, the opportunity to be paid on par with your peers, the opportunity to accomplish and kind of achieve your highest aspiration. So to me, equity is equal access to opportunity, defined as all of those things and more. And that's how I think about it. And when I describe it to people, I basically say, they say, why do we need equity? I say, essentially, over the course of however many years we've been at this thing, some people have been standing on pedestals, other people have been standing in holes. What we want to do is create the kind of workplace culture where either there are no pedestals and there are no holes, or everybody's on a pedestal. And we're not there yet.
And when you're having those conversations, how do you, one of the things I talk about is I'll give the example of reparations as an equity play, and I said many of us will be aware of the fact that the conversation around reparations can be very volatile, and there's very divergent opinions on that. But I also think it's an important conversation for us to have, along with all of these other lenses of how did we all end up starting at different points on the starting line? So how do you help the people you work with that you're influencing to understand the importance of the equity conversation?
Well, I honestly lead with data. So, my sandbox, if you will, is the workplace. I try to be really clear and tell people that diversity, equity, and inclusion covers a lot of ground. We sometimes call ourselves DE&I experts. I struggle with that, quite honestly, because I don't know any one person who is an expert in every single dimension of this work. We're talking about society, we're talking about the workplace, we're talking about education, et cetera, et cetera. So I focus on the workplace. That is what I know about. That's where my experience is and where my expertise lies. And so I lead with data inside those environments. I'll share with you an example. One time I was having a conversation with a client, with a group of people, and they basically asked me, well, we're talking about equity, we're talking about inclusion, what do I say to the white men on my team who are now worried because we're having this conversation that the opportunities will be taken away from them? So how do I respond to them? And I asked them, I said, okay, well, what percentage of your organization today is white men? And the answer was about 60%, which somewhat mirrors, right, kind of the national average in the workplace. And I said, okay, well, what percentage of your leadership is white men today? The answer was 97%. What I said to them was, to be honest with you, it is not reasonable to expect that opportunity will be difficult for them in our lifetime. They are almost 100% of your leadership ranks, but 60% of your workforce. And so your data would suggest this is not actually a real concern of theirs anytime soon. That said, To assume that opportunity will be taken away from them is to assume that opportunity belongs to them in the first place. An opportunity does not belong to any one group. Opportunity should be available and accessible for any person at any time, but that's not what it has been to this point. And so we need to do things, we need to put things in place, and we need to shift our processes to ensure that it is exactly that. So there are assumptions that people make when they've been used to being advantaged, that something belongs to them and you're going to take it, when in fact it does not, and it should not.
I really appreciate that that phrase, and I see that JD and put it in the chat as well, that opportunity doesn't belong to any group or any one individual, and we should all have access to opportunity. So I really love that message. And I, another way that I actually had a really great conversation with the Inclusion Advisory Council at one of our clients last week around the same topic of, and it was interesting, in the room, there was this question about how do we help the white men in the room feel like they're comfortable with it. And I was like, I'm not here to make people comfortable. That's not my goal. And I do want them to be part of the conversation. We want everyone to be part of the conversation. We want everyone to be included. And we need to find ways to include those individuals in this work and the conversation. But comfort is not the goal. It's change, and it's equity, and it's righting the wrongs of the past. And so we have to find our way through that. And one of the people in the room shared, and another example that I love, which is it's equal rights for you and me does not equal rights for me does not mean less rights for you. It's not pie. Like we can, the opportunity is not I love the success is not a mutually exclusive concept. Tara, you can be a successful culture firm at Hummingbird at Waymakers, and we can be a successful culture firm at Hummingbird, and everyone wins. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. And you bring up a really important point, I believe, this whole notion of, how do we make white men comfortable? To your point, I think that is the wrong question. That is not a question that I ever answer, because I don't believe it's the right question. Here's how I think about it. And I know that you and I see some of this very similarly. I think anytime you're in the midst of a major change, we all know this, right? Tipping point theory. You're always going to have about 20% of the people at the front end of that change. Like, let's change. Approximately 20% on the back end. Like, don't touch my stuff. I don't want to change. I like it this way. But the majority of people are usually in the middle, watching, waiting, observing, trying to figure out if they have a role to play in whatever's happening right now. If they do have a role, what that role is. If they have a sense of what that role should be, they're trying to get up their courage to actually engage. These are the people, honestly, who I wrote the Waymakers for. The Waymakers is an invitation to all those people in the middle who have been on the fence to get off the fence and into the equity arena. Because if they did something different, if they chose to be part of the solution, we would actually create the kind of change that would make a meaningful difference, right? We wouldn't be having this same conversation 20 or 30 years from now. So it really is about change, and it's about the degree to which we are open to and accept change, and the role that we are willing to play in facilitating meaningful change where every single person can thrive, can fulfill their aspirations. So we have a chance to create that together, but we only get there together.
I'm all on the better together bandwagon, so we'll definitely talk more about that. One thing that I want to just go back to something you said earlier, because I think this is it's important to highlight, is as we think about how do we invite others into the work, into the conversation, into the change that we're looking to make, is I fully will I offer that I have an expertise in DEI? Sure, I do have an expertise. I am also always learning every single day, and I actively invite the team at Hummingbird, for example, who I have a wonderful group of humans who have different backgrounds than mine. I invite them to challenge me, say, Brian, I I know what you're trying to do, but you're missing this piece of the puzzle, because I always know there's something more for me to learn. And one of the conversations we had recently in that spirit of what's in our lane and what's outside of our lane is, where is our expertise? And so, there are, I have an understanding of systemic oppression, and my expertise in that is understanding how that has impacted employees in the workplace and workplace cultures. Like, that's where I play. And I'm grateful that there are other humans. We work with some great clients. For example, one of our clients is the Children's Literacy Institute, and they work with how to help Black and Latinx children in K-3 have early childhood literacy. Well, they're better at than I don't know anything about that. And so it's going to take all of us doing our things in our lanes and and to make the change that we're looking to see in the world.
Yeah,
And I think
totally agree.
go ahead. Yeah. And I think this goes to what the core message of the Waymakers, which is, acknowledging we understand the systems of the oppression, but it's about what we each do. So how do you, and I think that's the core to the definition of the Waymaker. So how do you describe a Waymaker?
Yeah, so of course I love this question. For me, a waymaker is a person who opens doors, removes barriers, and helps usher people through to greater levels of contribution. Now, clearly contribution can be defined in many different ways, and there are so many doors for us to open. I wrote the Waymakers again for that 60% of those people with power and position inside workplaces to make different choices, to exhibit different behaviors, right? That we're going to unlock opportunity for more people, especially those who've been historically denied. But people have asked me, can anyone be a waymaker? And my answer is absolutely, because we all have some power and some position in our various places and spaces where we exist, right? And where we lead. We may know something that someone else needs to know but doesn't. We may know a person someone else needs to know but doesn't, right? We might have access to information. So we all have an opportunity to make a way for people who need us to make a way for them. But that's how I define it: opening doors, removing the barriers, ushering people through. And the reason I call it the Waymakers, people have asked me why that title, is because, to your point about systems, every single Black and brown person I know, for example, who has made it to the top of their organization, to the top of their game, has made it not because of systems change alone, but because someone made a way for them. Someone cared enough, someone was invested in them as a person, but also in their expertise, and they opened a door for them. And so, in my opinion, we need more of those people. We need more Waymakers to do exactly that.
And when I hear you describe this, what it feels like is there's also an under current for us to be aware of, and maybe that's not the right phrase, but the reality is, as we know, predominantly white men are in these roles of leadership, and we, as any of us as humans, are more likely to sponsor or mentor people that look like us. And so it's also those white men that got to those places of leadership because someone said, hey, I believe in you. And so how do we make sure that we're spreading that I believe in you to all of the different groups, particularly those that have been most marginalized over history? Does that align with how you sort of think about it?
Oh, absolutely. In the book, I talk about how we clear the path, right, to workplace equity. And I kind of talk about these 3 steps, like one being realism, meaning we have to be honest with ourselves about who we are and where we are on our journey today. The second is responsibility. We as leaders have to take responsibility for facilitating change. Again, we have to get off that fence and into the arena. But the third, and in my point, in my opinion, one of the most important, is we have to build relationship. And we have to build relationships across difference. You probably know, a few years ago, I'll never forget this, and I talk about it often, Cokewool, formerly known as Center for Talent Innovation, released some research basically saying that white people in America had 91 times as many white friends as they do Black friends. 91 times. I don't know about you, Brian, but I don't have 91 friends. So we can imagine, right, what the law of averages tells us about that. And if we're that isolated and insulated at home, we are likely doing that at work as well. And so that affinity bias, right, which I believe is the most insidious of the biases when we talk about actually achieving equity, that affinity bias plays itself out in a very unchecked, unconscious way inside our workplaces. We tend to see potential in people who remind us of ourselves, as you well know. We see possibility there. We give people benefits of the doubt that they may or may not have earned. But we do that when we can see ourselves in another person and we say, well, I believe they have what it takes. I think that he or she's going to rise to the occasion. They have an it factor. We don't even recognize that what we're really doing is mirroring, right? And when people don't remind us of ourselves, we want to give them stretch assignments. We want to give them a chance to prove their agility, to demonstrate their competence. We ask them to do that 2, 3, 4, 5 times. I call it the burden of proof, otherwise known as the hoop jumping Olympics. And by the time they've done 4 or 5 assignments to try to make us comfortable with their competence, now they have an edge. Now they're resentful because they realize they've had to jump through hoops that other people have not had to jump through. And they're resentful legitimately, in my opinion. And it creates another issue, right? We then start saying they're not professional, they're negative. So these are the kinds of things that play out inside our workplaces, and it's a huge problem.
Oh, absolutely. And we're all, well, I say we're all, I know you and I, and I'm sure many others with us today are, aware of some of those, those realities that experience. And the one that I will quote a lot in our work and my work is that we know that women, and there's two sides of this, women are more likely to apply for jobs that they know they're qualified for, and men are more likely to apply for jobs. They're like, I got 50% of that, I'm going to raise my hand. And then part of that is because on the flip side, what we know is men are given opportunity based on possibility or potential, and women are given opportunity on proven capability. And so like those two things go hand in hand to, over the course of time, which we know because of the reality of workplaces today, resulting in lesser representation of women in leadership roles or lower pay equity for women. And so those, they perpetuate, and and each of the little moments where someone makes one of those decisions, they build on each other over time. So it's how do we start?
Love that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that, because sometimes what we say is, women only apply for jobs when they're 100% qualified. And then we try to make that a confidence issue, but it's not always. It's a conditioning issue. I mean, to
Yes.
your point, it's because, that one time the woman did apply, or a couple of times she did apply for something she wasn't 100% qualified for. She didn't get the opportunity to do it because she wasn't 100% qualified for it. Whereas the man has gotten that opportunity because of those affinities, right? Because of that possibility mindset. So it's conditioning. When we say it's confidence only, we actually remove ourselves from a power position. We say there's nothing I can do about that. That's just her and her confidence issue, and that's BS. Because
Yes.
if we as leaders make different choices and exhibit different behaviors, we can actually change that conditioning, and that's really what we're asking people to do.
Yeah, I love that build on that, and I will start to add that language in there, because that is part of what I'm trying to say when I provide the two sides of the coin is if we put the responsibility only on women in that scenario, then we have taken ourselves out of being responsible for how are we part of the change, or how am I part of the change?
We are advocating our leadership responsibility. And for me, that's one of the main, areas of emphasis in the Waymakers book is that to be a waymaker, you have to be a conscious leader. And conscious leaders do these things. They behave in these ways. They make these kinds of choices. And, we're trying to, in my mind, we're trying to usher in a new era of leadership, of conscious and compassionate and courageous leadership.
Conscious, courageous, and compassionate leadership. Love that. Love that. Well, and one other example that I just wanted to share for those of us with us today, and I'm going to guess you probably have some activity like this, or may even use this activity, is an activity that I like to offer is the circle of trust, of write down your 10 closest advisors, just write them down in a list, and then write down then list their race, and then list their gender, and list their sexual orientation, and list their religion, and list their education. And I fully own that the first time I did this, my list was cisgender, gay, white guys who were Gen Xers, and most of us went to state schools. Like that was and most of us identified as Christian or didn't have a sort of a public approach to our religious beliefs. But it was very similar. And I'm like, I want to be a waymaker, and that's new language I'll start using now. I didn't have that, at the time, but I'm like, hey, I want to do this, and so I have a responsibility now to say, how do I change this list? What does that look like as actively taking ownership for that? And it sounds like that's part of what you're trying to do, is get people to like realize that ownership and responsibility.
Absolutely. I do have an exercise like similar to that, and I call it the GoTo Crew. And so there are kind of there are a series of questions. It's like, who do you go to first when you have a business problem, right? So it's a series of questions that I ask people to think about and to write lists down, and then of course to explore the different dimensions of identity that are present on their list. What I've learned over time, Brian, is that white men tend to have mostly white men on their lists. But if you think about people who are furthest removed from that power core, which happen to be women of color in these environments, their lists are often the most diverse. Why? Because of course they're the least represented. They don't have the option for all of their confidants, all of their advisors, all their collaborators to be just like them. That option does not exist when you're underrepresented. And so you actually have to learn to build those bridges across difference if you're going to be successful. Whereas white men in many of these environments never have to learn that. Should they though?
Yes.
Do they have the opportunity to? Would they benefit from doing so if they want their businesses to be sustainable into the future? Absolutely yes, on every count. And again, that's what I think we're trying to move to.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and I think there's also when we think about this systemic influences that we all have. So I am one of those white guys. So that's why my list was the way it was. And I also know that, and I knew this early on in my professional career, that I would not thrive in an environment that was not diverse. I just innately knew that I had to be around others that were different too, because I knew I was different as a gay man and as a person with a disability. And I'm also 6'6", and so I realized that most people think that is like, and I realize it has privilege from a visible perspective, but it makes me feel like an outsider so many parts of the day. So those things, like, I'm like, I need to be a place where people get me. And I've had to understand and figure out, okay, well, how do I bring so to put away those influences, which led me to align with more white men in the reality of success in my journey, and say, how do I embrace these people that make me feel accepted and included, because they're also different and unique as well. How do you define a waymaker? So how does someone become a waymaker? Like, it's I feel like you and I have signed up, but I'm like, I need to make sure is there a checklist? Can I go sort of say I'm doing all these things?
This is such a good question. And in the book, The Waymakers, I literally, here's why I wrote it. If we back up a little bit, I was spending time, as I'm sure you do, with my clients who are mostly CEOs and C-suite teams over the course of time. And I noticed that most of them had three things in common. So one, they wanted to do the right thing. Two, they didn't know exactly what the right thing was. And three, many of them felt a little bit unsure about how to step into the work. No one wanted to offend or insult or bring reputational risk upon themselves, quite frankly. And so there was a hesitancy. about getting into this work in a meaningful and bold way. And so I wrote the book to literally help someone with a heart to make a way. So that's the first step. Someone with a heart to make a way. I wrote it so that they would build the competence. This is why the mouthful, right, subtitle, so that they would build the competence to do it well and the confidence to put themselves out there, recognizing that there is no way to do this work with zero mistakes. You know, people don't want to do the work, or they're afraid to step into the work because they don't want to make any mistakes. They want to do it perfectly. You know, they want to feel protected and safe in doing it. And I say, look, humanity is messy. You know, there is no clean, error-free way to step into the middle of this work. So we have to be courageous in how we do that. And part of the confidence comes in recognizing that there is no risk-free way to engage in waymaking. So the book is really a guide in that way. It says, one, do you have a heart to do this? If so, you can. You can. And I'm going to show you how. And it starts with, again, you know, learning how to get a true and honest sense of where your culture is today, whether that culture is company culture or team culture, you know, whatever level. How do you get a sense of what that actual employee experience is right now? And so I walk people through climate assessments and the different ways to do them. Then it goes into that responsibility. One of the things we did in preparation for the book is some proprietary research in partnership with Brand Trust. And Brand Trust is a brand strategy firm that uses social and behavioral sciences to solve complex business problems. And we did a narrative inquiry study, Brian. So we asked hundreds of employees to tell us stories of times they felt seen, respected, valued, and protected. And to tell us stories of times they felt invisible and disrespected and underappreciated and scrutinized. And we culled those hundreds of stories to kind of pull out the key leadership choices and behaviors that contribute to that more inclusive feeling, right? And experience, and that contribute to the opposite of that. So we break all that down in the book. Look, this is what leaders do and how they behave that really do cultivate inclusion. And here's what they do and how they behave that does the opposite. And so I want to try to help people understand this on an extremely practical, right, tactical, day in and day out level, because that's what makes a culture, right? How we behave and show up every single day. Not what we say about it, not even the rules we put in place, but how we lead on a daily basis.
Actions speak louder than words.
Absolutely.
And
what are consistent actions?
Sure, right. What do I see happening repeatedly over the course of time? Whether it's about, you know, who's included, who's not included, what's said or not said, what decisions are made or not made, like all of those, they answer the questions of what is our culture, that, you know, and you can, like you said, you know, I love having a great mission, vision, values. And if the actions don't match it, and one of my favorite things to do, to encourage our clients to do, and we've done this with a couple of clients, is, okay, we need to map out what are the behaviors that represent your values, because it's so great that you have them, but if people don't know how to show up and live them, and then how do you assess whether those are happening or not if you're not all on the same page about how you define what those behaviors are?
Right. Well, and the accountability piece, right? I was in conversation with somebody just yesterday, and they said, okay, so you can have your vision and your mission and your values. You can talk even about the behaviors, what you're going to do to actually live that. But if you don't hold people accountable to that, it all kind of falls apart. And I think that's really important as well, which is why I'm so big on, and I talk about this in the Waymakers as well, I'm so big on holding ourselves and our other leaders accountable for leading in more equitable and inclusive ways. Like, what does that look like? What can we reasonably expect if we lead this way over time? How will we know if we're doing it well or if we're not doing it well? How are we going to intervene to help kind of right the ship? And then if there are leaders who either, you know, don't have the will to lead in this way or can't develop the skill to lead in this way, what choices are we going to make then? Because honestly, as you well know, leaders who are toxic, let's just say, hurt everybody in any environment. So toxic leaders hurt everybody, but they hurt the marginalized the most. And
Well,
so
and
we just need to be accountable.
totally. And when you have one of those leaders, and I have a list that's forming in my head of the ones I've seen over the course of my career. If you're let's say a CEO, and you know that you have one of those leaders on your team, everyone is paying attention of whether you're holding that person accountable or not.
Everybody.
And that is an action that speaks to whether you as a CEO stand behind your values or you don't.
That is absolutely right.
Yeah, and so and I get that it's not always easy. Like being a CEO and having to make those tough decisions, it's easy for me to sit from the sidelines and say, why aren't you making the tough decision or having the conversation? And I get that. And so I honor the humanity of the challenge, and also say, you have to lean into this comfort, because otherwise.
Yeah. That's why the courage part of this is so important, because we have to do hard things, in order to really kind of usher this work in. I talk about this in one of my trainings. Like, imagine this, there's a mountain, right? And you have kind of these 3 levels of culture. So as I mentioned earlier, you have the claim, or what you say about yourself. You have the policies or the rules you put in place to reinforce those claims. And then you have those norms, those daily choices and behaviors. And the way I explain it to leaders is, if you have this mountain and claims is at the top, and then you have policies, and then you have norms, and you have the employee experience at the bottom, like, I'm just the person, I'm the employee trying to climb this mountain toward who we say we are as a company. So if we say, I value diversity and inclusion, you say that, I'm the employee, I'm like, okay, that's good, I like that. If you put policies in place to reinforce it, I'm like, okay, this feels good. So I'm going to start coming up that mountain, because you're saying the right things and you're doing some of the right things. But the second I run into that norm, meaning I'm in a meeting and someone says something, racially insensitive, and nobody intervenes, I'm falling all the way back down that mountain. And that's what leaders have to recognize, that your norms define your culture, not any of the other stuff that we know is important, but doesn't get it done, right?
Yeah, agreed. And I think this goes back to, something you were saying earlier around how, and many of us will have heard the phrase that perfection is the barrier to progress. I'm fortunate that I was gifted with a mind that gave me academic success. And so I was one of those annoyingly straight A students all through college. And so when I got to the workplace and I started, and some of this I of course understand now as from the perspective of the messages the world has given me and expected me to show up perfectly. When I would start to get feedback, it would be really uncomfortable for me, and I wouldn't like it. I didn't handle it well. As it really was, I wish I could say that I had really owned that I learned how to accept feedback before 8 or 9 years ago in a meaningful way. But it was really stepping into this work where I, from a heart perspective, as you mentioned earlier, said, I want to do this job well, this work well, this job well, because I care about these other humans who've been marginalized, and I have an opportunity to make change. And that means I have to let go of my ego, let go of my desire to be perfect, and say, someone is choosing to take a risk, be vulnerable, and tell me something I've gotten wrong. And that helps me do what I want to do better. And if leaders can lean into that, have the courage to say, I'm going to be open to those conversations in those moments when something gets said. I don't expect people to be perfect. I expect you to say, I got it wrong. If someone says that you got it wrong, and own that, and then try to do better.
Yeah, it's so true. It reminds me, I think about the relationship between an employee and an employer. And you can think about that as an employee and a company, or an employee and a manager. I think about that relationship, quite honestly, the way I think about any relationship. We build trust through a series of pleasant interactions over time. That's how we build trust with individuals. That's how we build trust with organizations. So we need to recognize that that's what builds the trust over time. And whenever you have a relationship that is tenuous, right, or that gets fractured, we have to ask ourselves, do I want to be right or do I want to do right? What is my end game? You know, what am I trying to really create and cultivate here? And I have to recognize that the only way I get there is by learning my way there. It's true for any worthwhile endeavor. Whenever we want to do anything new that is worthwhile, we are going to make mistakes. We are going to stub our toe. We're going to trip and fall, but we get back up again and we keep going. The reality is this is a hard thing to get wrong. It's a very personal thing to get wrong. It causes us to question who we are. It causes us to question our idea of who we are, quite frankly, which is a very, I think, scary and vulnerable thing to do. But if we want to get to great, we need to think of it as we do any other worthwhile and challenging endeavor. And that is, we will learn our way there. My thought is, I want to learn my way there in partnership with other people. Let's learn our way there together, and kind of support each other along the way.
There's that word together again.
Yeah,
It is.
togetherness.
Yeah, well, and having been in my last in-house role at Tapestry, which is the home of Coach Kate Spade, Stuart Weitzman, as I was the global head of diversity and inclusion. There are 23,000 employees globally in that organization. And as much as I want to believe that I am a superhuman individual who can drive change around the globe, I am a single person with only so many hours in the day and people I want to spend time with outside of work and things I like to do. And I want to have balance. And so I said to, on many occasions, I can't do it alone anyway. Like, it's just not possible. So, and it's more fun. It's more interesting. It's also truly more aligned with the work if we're doing it together and we're inviting others to be part of it with us.
Yeah, for sure. And, I'm kind of watching the chat here and there too. Sherman brought up a really important point that leaders need to be coached to develop this mindset. They need capacity building. I think the other thing we recognize as well is you can have a heart to make a way. But if you don't have the mindset and the hands to make a way, if you will, if you don't have the tools, if you don't have the strategies, if you don't have the concepts, if you're not willing to kind of practice and then refine, along the way, then you're not really going to make the kind of impact that you want. So I tried, in the Waymakers to be, again, really practical about all of that. Because I didn't want to write a book that just said, yes, you can, and care more, and try harder, and it's going to be okay, and just love the people. Like, that's not the kind of book I wanted to write, because I recognize that even people who are good people who have good intentions, people who want to do the right thing, again, don't know in every case what the right thing is, and they don't know how. So we do need our leaders to build capacity to lead equitably and inclusively. And that is a very intentional thing for companies to invest in. They're not all investing in that, but they should.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely agree. Well, and well, first of all, before I say something else, I just want to invite everyone who's with us. If you have questions for Tara, feel free to add those to the chat, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So I wanted just to invite that from the group, and I love the engagement in the chat and the conversation that's happening there. When I have spent time with leaders, so my first book hasn't come out yet. So everyone says, Brian, be careful about committing to your second book. But what I have found in my first book, and I do have, the first chapter is on fear. So just acknowledging that, like, stepping into the discomfort of this, I think it's necessary. I think it's necessary as humans. I think it's necessary for business. I think it's important. And I want leaders to do it just because they should. And I also want to acknowledge they're humans who we're asking them to do something different than they were trained to do. They were brought up to do. They don't have the muscles, not the sort of metaphysical muscles, not the actual, like, do we have biceps? But and so I want to acknowledge that fear is part of it. And that came from, which is the idea that I have for the second book, which is the working title is The Things That I Got Wrong While I Was Trying to Get It Right. Because that's the reality. And what I find is a lot of times when I'm with groups of leaders, what I actually, they're like, Brian, I'm on board. Like, I want to do the right thing. I want to figure this out. I want to create environments that are inclusive and equitable and diverse.
That's right.
And I know that I'm going to get it wrong. I know that I'm going to make mistakes. I know that that I have things to learn. I don't know how I find the time for all of that. And so there's all of these things that come up. And so the things that they really need from me aren't that, yes, it is some of understanding systemic oppression, and they have to understand what does it mean to be a diverse, equitable, inclusive company. So there's an education, but the harder part for them is, how do I navigate through this in a way that sort of allows me to do it in a way that is respectful and meaningful, while also acknowledging that I'm a human going through change.
Yeah, yeah. That's why too, there is a part in the book that talks about the Waymaker principles. And there's also kind of choices, that Waymakers make and behaviors, again, that they abide by. And part of this is just bridge building. Like, how do we build bridges between people, between individuals? So whenever anybody asks me for a list, like, what's the script, what's the list of things to do and not do, and the things to say and not say, which people ask all the time, I say, that's not going to help you really like you think it will. Because if you focus on rules versus principles, this game, if you will, continues to change. And every time the game changes, the rules will change too. If, however, you determine a set of principles by which you will abide, you will always be able to show up in the present moment, right? In a principled way that allows you to evolve in partnership with other people. And to me, that is one of the secret ingredients here, is that people need to stop asking for the manual, stop asking for the rules, for the things to do and not do, and say and not say. Certainly there are some baseline things, right? Don't call anybody this word. I mean, whatever.
Sure.
But generally speaking, this is about relationship. This is about me coming to you and saying, Brian, welcome to my team. I'm so glad you're here. I want to just talk to you about the kind of leader I aspire to be. I will acknowledge now that I will not always show up in the way that is perfectly aligned with my aspiration. If and when I do lead in a way that goes against the kind of leader I say I want to be, I invite you to let me know. I'm on a learning journey just like you are, right? That's the kind of transparency and humility that allows us to create the kinds of connections that open doors to communication. And as long as we're talking to each other about what we need and whether we're getting it, we will get there. Maybe not in a straight line, maybe not as fast as we want to, but we will get there. And that's the kind of courage and vulnerability I'm talking about.
I love that. I love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I really appreciate I'm a big fan of guiding principles. And I use, actually, the team at Hummingbird probably has heard me mention guiding principles more times than they would like to admit. But, I'm a big believer. If you, the way that I often say it is, if you don't know where you're heading, then everything is a good answer. And even the bad answers are good answers, right? So the guiding principles are a directional tool, and yes, you can evolve them and adjust them as you learn and grow as a human or as an organization. Those guiding principles can be really helpful. And you can also, similar to the concept of values, you can play them out of like, okay, I have a guiding principle. What are the behaviors that match these guiding principles? So I can say, this is what that looks like. Well, there's a great question in the chat here I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
No.
Oh, I want to, there's a question, who has made a way for you in your own career, Tara? And I think it's an interesting question, because when I think about it, of sometimes and oftentimes when we are doing something like writing a book, it's really based on something that's been meaningful for us. So have you had waymakers in your career?
Absolutely. And I've had so many, and I like this question because sometimes people say, who is your waymaker? And I'm like, ooh, let's add an S to the end of that. I've had many. When I first started my career, I had people who created a safe place for me to ask all my, dumb questions, so that I could learn my way forward relatively early. Later in my career, I had specific women who, one, somebody kind of pulled the curtain back and told me what it took to succeed as an executive as she was preparing me to succeed her. Another connected me to all the people who were really the influencers. You have the people who have power, and then you have people who have influence, and they're different. So I've had people who connected me to them. One of the big stories, that I sometimes share that was really powerful in my entire life, not just my corporate career, was I actually worked directly with Dr. Maya Angelou for a decade when I was at Hallmark. I was her editing partner, if you will. We had greeting cards and gifts with her words on them. And we were having an experience in Santa Monica, and long table, bunch of people in this meeting. And I was initially standing across from the seat she was in. And we had two more people come in, and I was going to give them my seat because I was trying to be courteous. And she kind of looked at me across the table and with her eyes, like, sat me down, if you can imagine.
I love that.
So I sat down across from her, and she leaned in and she said, you are just as worthy of that seat as anyone in this room. Don't ever give your seat up for anyone. And so you have those moments where people make a way for you by how they help you see yourself. They hold a mirror up to you and help you see something that maybe was not as clear to you. But there are other times when it is really pointed, like, I want you to meet this person because you have this need, they have this gift. And if I bring the two of you together, right, that's going to create opportunity for you. And other times, again, it's just pouring into you. It's just helping you see the best in yourself. And I believe every single person on this planet has an opportunity to be at least that for somebody.
We all can make a difference in someone else's life. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm a bit jealous that you got to spend that much time with Dr. Maya Angelou. So I'll be giving you a buzz later and be like, we got to talk. And we got to talk greeting cards. I think greeting cards are a lost art, and I have a whole drawer of them, so we can talk about that.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
But thank you for sharing that really beautiful story. And I think, what it illuminates for me or reminds me is, sometimes we think that this work to be a waymaker, to be an advocate, to be a mentor is, and I want it to be for those of us that take the responsibility and the commitment to be something we do on a regular basis in a repeated way over the course of time. But sometimes it's really about a moment that you do something that makes a difference for a human. And some of those moments are the ones that I remember in my life that are the most meaningful. It's when someone makes you feel seen, helps you feel valued and included, and that you're making a difference. And sometimes those moments are big moments, and sometimes they're small moments, but those moments are meaningful.
I love that, and I completely agree with you. And for me, I consider myself a waymaker at heart. And in practicality. And one thing I have learned to do over time is ask people who reach out to me, how can I help? Because that help looks different to people depending on where they are in their journey, and what it is they're trying to achieve. But to me, like that waymaker status, right, where your mindset is always just, how can I help? How can I serve you? How can I serve this moment? That's where I'm trying to get to consistently, to be that person who makes life better for other people by what I know, what I do, what I commit to, and what I say even. So it is a journey. It's a waymaker journey. I'm on it. I know you're on it, Brian.
I'm totally on it.
Many, many more people on it. I hope people will order the Waymakers and share it with others, because it is time. It is time for us to do our part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I know I have so many other things I want to talk to you about, and we can find time for that. I want to be respectful of your time today and everyone who's with us. How do people, I'm going to ask you two questions for efficiency. So how do people find you, follow you, connect with you? I think we've included some things in the chat, but I would love to have that for you to answer it. So for those that are watching, and then what would be the final words that you'd like to leave the group with?
Yeah, so they can find me at tarajfrank.com. We are the waymakers.com. I know that Mark has been great about putting things in the chat for sure. Please do, pre-order the book. It's anywhere books are sold. You can pre-order right now, comes out on May 3rd. And then what I'd like to leave people with is, when we mend the deepest wound, we heal the body. Meaning if we can better understand the workplace experience that people on the margins are having, if we can understand what they need most right now, and if we can meet those needs meaningfully, we can actually create a better workplace and a better experience for every single person in our charge. And so to me, that's the hack, right? That's the innovation hack. Start with the deepest pain, and we have a chance to heal the body. And I hope that's what we choose to do together.
Thank you for that important message. Well, Tara, it was such a pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you so much again for saying yes. I know releasing a book, you have lots of people who want to hear from you, and I really appreciate you choosing to spend time with us at Hummingbird and the Hummingbird community. I wish you much success.
I appreciate being invited.
Well, you're welcome. Of course, of course. Well, and I wish you success because I want you to be successful. I also really want your message to reach people. I think it's so important. It is a journey and we need everyone on it together. So thank you so much, Tara. Everyone that's with us today, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing in the chat. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. And until next month, stay safe and be well. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.